The most dangerous, outdated idea you can follow today is the standard path. Go to school, get a job, work hard, save money, get out of debt, and invest for the long term in the stock market. That formula used to work for our grandparents, but today, it's a recipe for financial obsolescence. Think about it. Why would you spend your life hoarding money when the government is printing trillions of dollars out of thin air? The gap between the 1% and the 99% isn't just about greed. It's a massive chasm created by a lack of financial education. To survive the coming years, you have to step back and look at the bigger picture. Inside every single one of us, there is a conflict between three different people. There is a poor person, and believe me, there is still a poor person inside of me sometimes. Then there is a middle-class person who craves nothing but security. They want that steady paycheck and the feeling of being safe. Finally, there is the rich person. The problem: our school system is designed to feed the first two and completely ignore the third. You are taught how to be a cog in the machine, but you are never taught how to own the machine. Chapter 1, The Paycheck Trap. If you've ever read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, you know the foundation of my education. My rich dad refused to pay me. He said a paycheck was one of the most damaging things you could ever receive in your life. That sounds crazy to most people, right? But his logic was flawless. He said, the moment you accept a paycheck, you have become an employee. And that is a mindset. When you become dependent on that monthly deposit, you become a slave to money. My poor dad, a highly educated government employee, thought this was insanity. He'd yell, "You have to pay people. People deserve a wage." But my rich dad wasn't saying getting paid was evil. He was saying he didn't want me to be addicted to the safety of a salary. As an entrepreneur, my security doesn't come from a boss. It comes from my ability to create. If my company folds tomorrow, I don't go looking for a resume. I just start another company. I don't need a paycheck, and I don't need anyone to take care of me. If a government becomes hostile to my business, I simply move my capital to another country where entrepreneurs are welcomed. Entrepreneurship isn't just a business model. It is a psychological fortress and a completely different set of rules. Chapter 2, The Leap of Faith. People often ask me, what would you say to someone who has never been an entrepreneur but is thinking about taking that leap of faith? I always tell them the story of my last day at Xerox. I still remember it clearly. It was one of the worst and best days of my life. I was in Puerto Rico and my boss handed me my final bonus check. It was about $30,000. For a young guy, that was a holy mackerel moment. I was excited, but deep down, I was terrified. As I was walking out, a colleague named John came up to me. He looked me in the eye and said, "You'll be back." I asked him why, and he said, "Because you're going to fail." John had done exactly that. He left Xerox, failed, got scared, and came crawling back to his cubicle. I looked at him and said, "Look, you failed and came back, but I'm going to fail and never come back." That is the fundamental difference. If you tell yourself, well, if I fail, I can always go back to my old job, then that is exactly what you will do. I truly became an entrepreneur when I had no money and no safety net. When the paycheck stops, you get hungrier. You get smarter. It becomes a test of your character. Will you become a thief? Will you become dishonest? Or will you evolve into a better, stronger human being? Being an entrepreneur reveals who you are when you have nothing. Chapter 3, The Expiration Date of Ideas. You must train yourself to see the macro view. Most people are stuck in a micro view. What is going to happen to my rent? What is going to happen to my car payment? When you look at the big picture, you realize that every bad event is the parent of a good opportunity. But you have to be prepared for the change. If you think the next 20 years will look like the last 20, you're already finished. Think about it. When you go to the supermarket and buy a carton of milk, you always check the expiration date. Yet most people are walking around with ideas in their heads that expired in 1971. Take the idea of getting out of debt. Traditional experts scream about being debt-free. I say, learn how to use debt. I recently refinanced $300 million in debt. I dropped my interest rate from 5% down to 2.5%. I made a fortune overnight because the cost of my capital dropped. While the savers are struggling with inflation, I'm using the bank's money to buy assets that pay me every single month. Debt and taxes make the rich richer, but they make the poor and middle class poorer because they don't know how to use the system. Chapter 4, the 1% secrets, taxes and control. When I came home from Vietnam in '73, my rich dad gave me one mission: learn how to invest in real estate. He wasn't just talking about buildings, he was talking about the two things that cream the middle class: taxes and interest. I see brilliant doctors and lawyers making $1 million a year. They think they're rich, but then they pay $750,000 in taxes. Their net is peanuts compared to their effort. When I make $1 million, I keep $1 million. The reason is simple. I don't work for a wage. If you work for money, you are the easiest target for the tax collector. Lesson number 1 in Rich Dad, Poor Dad is that the rich don't work for money. We create systems. As an entrepreneur and a real estate investor, I pay zero tax legally. Every time I make $1 million, I immediately move it into a real estate asset with a 4-to-1 step up. I put in $1 million, the bank gives me $4 million, and the government gives me tax breaks for providing housing. I love banks because they provide the leverage that savers are too afraid to touch. Chapter 5, obsolete education. The world changed forever in 1971 when Nixon took the US dollar off the gold standard. That's the day money became debt. Today, the world is flooded with printed currency. Banks don't even want your savings anymore. That's why interest rates on savings accounts are a joke. In this environment, savers are losers and money is trash. Yet people are still desperately looking for a high-paying job. That is an obsolete solution to a modern problem. Information now doubles every 18 months. That's Moore's Law. By the time you finish a 4-year degree, half of what you learned is already useless. The 1% is pulling away because they understand that printing money leads to two things: inflation and taxes. These two forces crush anyone who works for a paycheck. Most of the 28 million small business owners in America are actually just self-employed. They own a job, not a business. They pay the highest taxes and have the least amount of freedom. To move into the 1%, you have to change your internal focus. Conclusion: command your internal economy. There is no such thing as a bad economy for an entrepreneur. We all have an external economy: the news, the stock market, the government. But we also have an internal economy. Your power lies in your ability to change that internal state. I can see a market crash and not give a damn because I know how to make money when the market goes up and when it goes down. But a person with a weak internal economy only sees a bad economy. They are terrified of losing their steady paycheck or their house. And because they are afraid, that fear usually manifests into reality. My mentor, Bucky Fuller, taught me that there are always two sides to every coin. If you think the economy's bad, it's actually your internal economy that is struggling. A true entrepreneur has an internal focus. If they fall, they say, "This is great, because the lesson I learn here will take me higher." The average person falls and looks for someone to blame or a pill to take. Your first job, before you buy a building or start a company, is to take control of what is happening inside your own mind. The moment you lose that internal control, you become a servant to the external world. Mastery isn't about the market, it's about internal sovereignty.